Okay, welcome back. In this clip, we're going to look at an academic field that calls itself comparative historical linguistics. Now, as a warning, it's going to get a little dry at times, but I think it's a lot of nerdy fun, actually, once you get kind of the hang of the lingo, if you know what I mean. Now, the basic question that comparative historical linguists have been preoccupied for like 200 years now is very simple, I think. Like, it's easy to understand. How could it be that the classical Indian language of Sanskrit and its modern descendants, like Hindi and so on, are genetically related to European languages? It's a fascinating puzzle, and the amazing story of how this question was posed and solved starts with a Welshman named William Jones. Now, Sir William Jones was an interesting guy, to say the least. He was the son of a prolific Welsh mathematician, also named William Jones, who was Oxford educated and then found himself working in Calcutta as an administrator and legal expert for the British East India Company in the late 1700s. Now, he wasn't just a 9-to-5er kind of office guy, but spent his free time deeply engaged in scholarly work. He was highly trained in classical languages, Latin, Greek, ancient Persian, and also Sanskrit. He translated a great number of Sanskrit and Persian texts while he was in India. He wrote a Persian grammar. He founded the first scholarly society in British India called the Asiatic Society of Bengal, and he edited their academic journal. And on top of all that, he was also an accomplished poet. Believe it or not, he did all of this in a very short lifetime. He passed away in Calcutta in 1789 at the very young age of 47. The 3 years before all that happened, he gave a speech at the Asiatic Society that would profoundly change the way in which the entire world viewed India, Sanskrit, and the ancient history of the entire world. On February 2nd, 1786, in his annual address to the Asiatic Society of Bengal in Calcutta that he founded, he made a profound statement about Sanskrit that I think is worth reading in full. So here we go. The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either. Yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity both in the roots of verbs and the forms of grammar than could possibly have been produced by accident. So strong indeed that no philologer could examine them all three without believing them to have sprung from some common source, which perhaps no longer exists. There is a similar reason, though not quite so forcible, for supposing that both the Gothic and the Celtic, though blended with a very different idiom, had the same origin with the Sanskrit, and the Old Persian might be added to the same family. In just these few lines, Jones was able to make the entirety of Europe fascinated with A, the wonders of Sanskrit as a classical language, and also India as a very ancient culture, and B, the idea that Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, Persian, and all the languages of Europe actually were descended from a single common ancestor language. This idea led to the birth of an entire field of science called comparative historical linguistics. Now, it's worth noting that while everyone heard Sir William Jones's declaration around the world, he wasn't the first to make this kind of observation. In India, in fact, the idea had already been kicked around by an indigenous Urdu and Persian writer named Sirajuddin Ali Khan Arzu, who in 1752 kind of brashly declared that up to this day no one has conceived of the tawafuk between Hindi and Persian except this fakir Arzu, in spite of the fact that there were a number of dictionary makers and other scholars of this guiding science. Some earlier Europeans had also noticed connections between Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Persian, and so on, but like I'm saying, it was Jones's statement, published in this widely read journal, that kind of got heard around the world and ended up launching this new academic field of study. Now, what do linguists do with all these related languages of Europe and Asia? Just like evolutionary biologists do with their animal species, the big project of philologists was to try to explain how all of these different languages all over the world came from a single common original. And here's a brief overview of how this discipline, which is still there today, goes about doing it. First, the goal is to compare vocabulary and grammar of what are called cognate languages in this Indo-European family. The word cognate is an important term to learn. If two languages are cognate, it means that the words they share, the cognate words, are not borrowed from one another, but they've come down from a common parent language. It's inherited. It's an inherited trait. It's like if you and your sister both have blue eyes, it's because of your parents, right? But if you and your best friend have the same pair of blue jeans, same brand of blue jeans, it's not because you have the same parents, it's because you maybe shopped at the same store, right? One's borrowed, one's inherited. Anyway, comparative historical linguists compare cognate vocabulary and grammar in different languages and then try to reconstruct what the parent language's traits would have been like. What's the inherited traits? This reconstructed language, supposedly the mother language to all this huge spectrum of different languages from Europe all the way to India, is called Proto-Indo-European. It's a hypothetical language, meaning that there's no actual texts ever been found written in Proto-Indo-European. Its existence is only theoretical. Linguists come up with this proto-language not just by random guesswork, but by proposing and formalizing a whole complex set of transformational rules that can help you understand how the modern languages have descended down from that Proto-Indo-European over thousands of years. If you ever get a chance to take a historical linguistics class, I would urge you to do so. You'll get to learn a bunch of these rules. It is a dry subject, I have to say again, but it'll help you appreciate how complex the science is. And it's not just what you can see on the internet. It's not just a hobby or just kind of randomly putting together sets of similar words and saying like, look, they're related. It's a lot more complicated and technical field of study. Nowadays, after reconstructing literally thousands of words and all kinds of grammatical features of this Proto-Indo-European, this PIE, scholars have been able to prove that there's a huge spectrum of languages, all the way from Ireland to India, that have descended from this common original language. Here's a visualization of that evolution. It's kind of awesome, I think, right? The languages at the edges are the modern Indo-European languages. And they can be grouped into distinct subfamilies, which then all are traced back to a common original, this PIE, which was maybe spoken around 5000 BC. But we don't know where it was spoken, we don't know by whom it was spoken, and we don't know how these other languages got to all those places where they're spoken today. And this is where all the speculation begins. From very early in the game, language got tied to ethnicity in a way that we should be kind of cautious about. When studying Sanskrit and Persian, Europeans noted that the word Arya in Sanskrit and Arya in Persian are cognate, right? And they're generally used by the speakers of these languages to refer to themselves. Both words actually just mean noble or elite. But for colonial era European scholars, this seemed to be a clear ethnic or racial label, and they used it that way. They proposed that Aryan referred to a race of people in ancient India who had the following traits. One, they spoke Sanskrit, which was a direct descendant of this Proto-Indo-European. Two, they performed fire sacrifices, which we'll learn about next week. Three, they used horses and chariots. 4, they were ethnically related to the rest of the Indo-European speakers all across Europe, Persia, and Central Asia. And 5, archaeologically speaking, in terms of material culture, they had this kind of pottery called the painted grayware, and also they had iron. Now, it might be tempting to say that speakers of Proto-Indo-European all belong to a single Aryan ethnic group, but we got to be careful about this, I think. Thomas Troutman, in fact, reminds us in our readings that, quote, "The relation between languages and people is not a necessary one, but a contingent one." I think it's an important thing to think about. This means that people of the same ethnic group generally will speak the same language, but people who speak the same language don't have to be from the same ethnic group. I think that nowadays we actually, this is not such a strange idea to us. We generally can decouple the idea of language from race or ethnicity, but sometimes we still too easily link them together, lump them together when we're thinking about the ancient past. I feel like we should be more careful about this. Otherwise, we'll end up perpetuating kind of very simplistic models about how language and identity worked in the ancient past. This is a topic that we're actually going to talk about a lot more in the next segment. So let's take a break here, and then I'll see you in a few.